Have you ever wondered why some organizations completely crash and burn while others absolutely thrive? It is, without a doubt, the most high-stakes question in all of business. I mean, we're living in a world where companies are competing fiercely on price, delivery times, and product differentiation. Maintaining your competitive edge isn't just a nice goal to have, it's literal survival. So, in this explainer of operational strategy, we're going to unpack the actual mechanics of operational success. And, even better, we're going to uncover a mathematical secret that the world's top organizations use to gain a massive competitive edge.
But to figure out why companies succeed, we kind of have to look at why they fail first, right? Failure doesn't usually just happen overnight. It's almost always a combination of missteps. Companies might put way too much emphasis on short-term financial performance, or they fail to recognize incoming competitive threats, or maybe they completely miss the mark on what their customers actually want. But I want you to consider that very first point on this list, neglecting operations strategy. When companies fail to invest in their internal efficiency, their human resources, and their capital, they completely lose their footing. Mastering your internal operations is the foundation for absolutely everything else.
And that brings us to the absolute core of our explainer today. We are going to explore the secret weapon of productivity, decoding the learning curve. I am so incredibly enthusiastic to share this with you today because it takes something that feels, entirely qualitative, like human learning and experience, and it translates it directly into measurable, predictable cost savings. It's absolutely fascinating how human behavioral progress can literally be mapped out mathematically to drive your entire business strategy.
All right, here's a quick look at our roadmap. We'll cover the competitiveness challenge, the learning curve itself, its 3 core assumptions, the math behind the magic, how to visualize the data, and we'll wrap up with real-world applications.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the competitiveness challenge.
Look, it really all comes down to this one simple fact. Productivity is a massive determinant of cost. An organization's operations dictate exactly how quickly and cheaply they can produce a product or deliver a service. If your productivity rates are higher than your competitors, well, you instantly gain a competitive cost advantage. And what does that mean for you? It means you can either offer a lower price to your customers to win market share, or you can just keep your prices the same and enjoy a much wider profit margin. Either way, productivity is the real engine behind a winning pricing strategy.
Moving right along to Section 2, enter the learning curve. So, what exactly is the learning curve? You might also hear it referred to in the business world as an experience curve or maybe a progress function. But it's formally defined as a line displaying the relationship between unit production time and the cumulative number of units produced. Simply put, human performance naturally improves when we do things over and over again. The time required to perform a task naturally decreases as the number of repetitions increases. We get faster because we get better.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 3 core assumptions.
Now, according to the research, this whole theory rests on 3 foundational assumptions. First, the amount of time required to complete a given task will simply be less each time you do it. Pretty intuitive, right? Second, the unit time will decrease at a decreasing rate. This just means your biggest, most noticeable leaps in efficiency happen early on, and then those improvements gradually level out over time. And third, this reduction in time follows a highly predictable pattern. These assumptions were actually first observed and proven to hold true in the airplane manufacturing industry, which is a perfect transition for us.
All right, let's get into the really fun stuff in Section 4, the math behind the magic.
I want you to basically burn this number into your brain. 80%. When this phenomenon was first studied in airplane manufacturing, observers found this absolutely incredible pattern. Now, by convention, we use a percentage rate to denote learning curves. And an 80% learning curve establishes a golden rule. Every time the cumulative output of units doubles, the production time per unit drops by a constant 20%. In other words, it becomes 80% of what it was before the production doubled. Let's actually prove this doubling math using that classic Boeing airplane example. Let's say Unit 1, the very first plane off the line, takes 100,000 direct labor hours to build. Watch what happens when production doubles to Unit 2. It drops by 20%, taking exactly 80,000 hours. Now double the output again to Unit 4. We take 80% of the 80,000 hours, which gives us 64,000 hours. Double it one more time to Unit 8, and the time drops to 51,200 hours. Because of that consistent 20% reduction every single time output doubles, we call this an 80% learning curve. It is just a stunningly reliable mathematical rhythm.
Let's move on to Section 5, Visualizing the data.
When you actually visualize this data, you can see how production cost drops super rapidly right at the beginning of the volume axis, and then it begins to steadily decrease at a decreasing rate, forming that classic curve shape. But what's really fascinating here is comparing different learning rates. Just look at the difference between a 90% curve, an 80% curve, and a 70% curve. If your first unit cost $100, well, by the 30th unit, a 90% rate brings that cost down to around $60. But a steeper 70% learning rate, that plunges the cost all the way down to just over $17. Small differences in how fast your organization learns can create dramatic effects on your bottom line.
Now, there's a really important distinction we need to make here between two different metrics that managers use. On one hand, you've got time per unit. This tracks the decrease in time required for each successive individual unit. But on the other hand, you have cumulative average time. This shows the average performance time across all the units you've produced so far. The cumulative average curve doesn't drop nearly as fast as the individual unit time because it's averaging out those heavily time-consuming early units with the much faster later units. It is absolutely crucial not to confuse your current individual cost with your overall historical average cost when you're planning out your strategy.
But here is where it gets really interesting. While a standard arithmetic plot gives us that sweeping curve we just looked at, if we take that exact same data and plot it on a logarithmic scale, specifically a log-log scale, the curve magically turns into a straight, predictable downward line. In the real world, analysts absolutely love using the logarithmic scale because this linearity makes it so incredibly easy to extrapolate future costs. And you can read the data accurately without having to manually calculate the math for every single successive unit.
Let's wrap things up with Section 6, Real-World Business Applications.
This isn't just for complex airplanes, guys. It totally applies to high-volume repetition, too. Think about a massive fast food chain. If their current variable cost is 55 cents per burger, what happens as they scale up? Well, with a 90% learning curve, by the time cumulative production hits 10 million burgers, the cost falls to 49.5 cents. But what happens at an accumulated experience of 1 billion hamburgers? The variable cost drops to less than 25 cents per burger. Whether we're talking about massive global burger franchises or scaling up a local business like Carbites Bakery, this just proves that sales volume isn't only about driving revenue. It's about accelerating your experience so you can achieve massive cost savings that a smaller competitor simply cannot match.
Because this phenomenon is so remarkably reliable, organizations use it practically everywhere. Operations managers use it for manpower planning and scheduling at tech companies like Decoding Inc. Supply chain buyers use it constantly in negotiated purchasing. I mean, if they're buying complex components in bulk, they will literally use learning curve math to negotiate lower prices on the later units because they know the supplier's costs are dropping. It's also used to price new products competitively right from day one, whether you're pricing commercial airplanes or you're estimating average labor costs at 40,000 PHP per unit for a local furniture shop. It helps you plan inventory capacity to make sure materials flow in fast enough to keep up with your speeding workers. Boeing even uses it to estimate weight reductions in new aircraft designs.
So, we've seen the data, we've run the math, and the takeaway is pretty undeniable at this point. Human performance improves predictably with repetition. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If human productivity naturally follows a predictable learning curve, what is your organization intentionally doing to accelerate it? Are you actively capturing that experience, or are you just sitting back and letting the competition learn faster than you? Harnessing your team's learning isn't just a nice little bonus. It is the ultimate secret to securing your competitive advantage. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you leave today ready to put this knowledge to work.